Number one. All right. So Africa is not a country. All right. Although sometimes we may view it as one, or we kind of lump everything in Africa together. It's a continent. Actually, the second largest continent in the world. So Africa has 1.216 billion people, and it also is home to the world's largest desert, the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert is about the size of the United States. It also has the world's longest river. Also, anybody here seen the movie Boys in the Hood before? All right, so you know the movie Boys in the Hood where he says, "All of y'all are from Africa." There's a little bit of truth to that, and what he meant by that is there's African roots in mostly all of us, and what that means is civilization, as we know it, started in Africa. And the reason why is the oldest human remains ever discovered were found in Ethiopia, which was approximately 200,000 years ago. And even older than that, that's Homo sapiens. Hominids, which are people who walk on 2 feet, were found about 2.8 million years ago. This Tong Chao fossil was found in 1924, but it was 2.8 million years old. Now again, we said that Africa has the world's longest river. So when you go from hunters and gatherers, which is what people in Africa were at first, to industrialized civilizations, you need food, you need water, you need all of these things, right? So the Nile River gave people easy access to grow crops. This starts one of the first empires, which is ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, one of the unique things about ancient Egypt is they were the first people to create a measuring system. One of the first people to create a measuring system. They had what was called a cubit, and that was the length of one person's arm. They also are responsible for contributing the 24-hour-a-day system and also the 365-day year. The other unique thing about ancient Egypt, y'all older, so y'all got driver's license, right? Yeah. So on your driver's license, have you ever paid attention to the top of it? On the top of it, you have famous things that are in the state of Tennessee. One of them being the pyramid, which is in Memphis, which is now a Bass Pro Shop. But neither here nor there. So these pyramids are designed after the pyramids in Egypt. Why, you ask? Because there was a city in ancient Egypt that was called Memphis, and the city of Memphis is named after that particular city. So they had these big pyramids that they were buried in, basically. Pharaohs, as they were called, believed that when they died they would go on to become gods. So they took into these pyramids everything that they felt like they would need in the afterlife. That's food, their pets, gold, jewelry, all of that stuff. They took it into these pyramids with them. Now, who's the richest man that you know of?
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. All right. Got anybody else? Bill Gates. Now, the richest man to ever live is an African man by the name of Mansa Musa. So Mansa Musa had so much gold that he went on a pilgrimage to Mecca, and he literally just handed out gold to poor people the entire trip there. He also wanted to spread the word of Islam, so he built mosques in every single stop that he made. He gave out so much gold that he brought down the value of gold, meaning he gave out so much gold that people stopped seeing value in it because so many people had it. So that's the story of Mansa Musa. And another one that is really unique is the story of Nefertiti. Y'all can come on. It's all good. It's all good. So Nefertiti, you back again. Welcome back. Alright, so Nefertiti, anybody in here Tupac fans? Alright. So Tupac actually has a tattoo of Nefertiti on his chest. So she was one of the first female rulers. Her and her husband at the time were basically what we would call a power couple. Think like Jay-Z and Beyonce, but times 20 million. So the question that people always ask is, if black people were doing so well, if they were kings, if they were queens, if they had gold, what happened? How did they end up being slaves? How did we end up where we are today? how do we go from being kings and queens to being slaves? All right. If I walked in here with a big pile of gold right now, right, and I'm just flashing it in front of everybody, or if I just walked in here with a bunch of money, what could possibly happen to me?
You gonna steal it?
Could be robbed. People will steal it, right? So when Mansa Musa goes on this pilgrimage to Mecca, everybody finds out that Africa is this popular place for gold, and everybody wants a piece of it. So they're exposed to threats. They're exposed to attacks. They're exposed to a lot of different things that eventually they didn't have the infrastructure to keep up with. So the age of exploration is the first thing that kind of puts a mark on the back of people in Africa. Because with the age of exploration, we find this new territory of what we now know as the United States. It was then called the New World. So Christopher Columbus set sail trying to find a new route to Asia. Instead, he finds the New World. So that's why that's why the area in South America is called the West Indies, because he thought he had reached India, but instead he had just reached South America. So at the age of exploration, people start to explore, people start to go around, and they start to say, hey, there's this new piece of land. If you all want to go over there and cultivate the land, you can make money. But as we just learned over here, you have to have something of value that people want. So what is this thing of value that people want? It's called tobacco. All right. So Native Americans teach Europeans how to smoke tobacco. They fall in love with it, they enjoy it, and then it becomes something that is monetary value. Now, not to glorify smoking, but that is the reason why literally we're here today. The United States wouldn't exist if it wasn't for tobacco. That was the main economy. That was the main thing that pushed the economy forward. Now what happens as a result of that? You need more people to grow this tobacco. And that creates what is known as, what we know as the Middle Passage. Now, the arrival in Jamestown happens in 1619. There was 20 slaves on this particular ship. They settled in what's called Jamestown, Virginia, and only 20 slaves are on this original ship. Now, what does life look like aboard this ship? This is a painting of a group of slaves who were on the ship. If you can look at this painting, they look pretty malnourished, they look pretty skinny, and there was a lot of trial and error that happened with the Middle Passage. Sometimes slaves didn't make it because they weren't fed enough food. Sometimes slaves didn't make it because they caught diseases. There was a bunch of different things why slaves didn't make it. So there was a lot of trial and error to finally get it right. So life aboard the Middle Passage was horrible. No other way to put it than that. It was horrible. There was a lot of different things that happened to dehumanize slaves, and that could be just being beat for no apparent reason, changing your name, making you forget your culture. So this process was meant to break you and literally make a slave. So on this picture here, you see another painting. There's a lot of people at the bottom of the slave ship. Men were at the bottom of the slave ship. Women stayed on the top of the slave ship, and also young children stayed on the top of the slave ship. Now, Harold, how tall were you when you were 12?
5'10".
5'10". You would be treated like a male, a man, a grown man, and you would go to the bottom of the ship. They used your height to base what they considered you as a male or a child, a man or a child, basically. So you would be treated just like anybody else. Now, Makai, come over here for a second. Now, me and Makai are on this ship together, right? And we're chained together. So we will be chained here by our arms, but also be chained by our feet as well. Somebody in the other group said, what if we have to go to the bathroom? So do you think that they gave like a hall pass and said, hey, go use the bathroom real quick, make sure you come back in a short period of time? No. we would literally be chained to the floor, and if he had to go use the restroom, he just had to go. If he got seasick and he threw up on himself, that was just that. No clean up on aisle 3, none of that. All right, just whatever. They didn't really bathe much initially until a lot of people got sick and stuff like that. So then they would bring them above the ship. They would make them exercise or jump up and down to keep their blood flowing. And they would also wash them with a little bit of soap and water as well. Now you finally get to America, and what's waiting on you then? Probably one of the most humiliating processes in recent history. What is called the slave auction. So this is a really nice version of the slave auction because these people are clothed, and that's typically not how it went. So with the slave auction, you would literally stand probably on a platform like this. If you were a woman, you probably didn't have much clothes on. If you were a male, you probably just had something to cover your lower area. And this was basically, you were sold like you were an item. So if I was selling Juwan, I would say he's fast, he's strong, he's big. I wouldn't say anything about him being a nice person, his character. The only thing that they care about is the fact that he can work in the fields. Now the other thing that happens is you have what's called the breeding of slaves when they get to America. So I might take Juwan, somebody who's fast, and pair him with somebody who's tall so that I can get a really strong, big, fast slave to work in the fields for me. Now I also don't want you all to think that slavery was just working in the fields, because it wasn't. Slaves had many other jobs. They were skilled craftsmen. They made a bunch of different things. They were carpenters, all of those different things. They even sailed ships. So there was a lot of different jobs that slaves had. But slavery as we know it is mostly working in the fields. But that's not all that they did. The women were nurturers. They were basically nannies is what we would call them today. They took care of the kids of the slave owners, the wives, and things like that. Question before I go on? Questions, comments? You got a question? You good? All right. So, I know what you all are thinking. Wouldn't have been me, I would have been ready to fight for mine. Ain't nobody putting me underneath, a boat. I would just be ready to throw a couple blows, right? So in the next exhibit, we're going to talk about resistance to slavery. Exhibit number 3. Like I said, most of y'all are probably thinking, hey, wouldn't have been me, I would have been ready to fight for mine. But what risk do you run if you are resisting slavery? Getting killed, getting shot. What else?
Beaten.
Being sold.
Beaten, being sold. Yeah, for sure. So there was many different ways that people resisted slavery. One of them was cultural resistance to slavery. So some people just said, I'm not going to worship the same God that you worship. I'm going to stay true to my African faith. Some people just said, I'm not going to, do songs and dances. I'm going to stay true to African traditions that I have. So there was cultural resistance to slavery. There was also legal resistance to slavery. Another legal resistance to slavery was, well, the big one rather, was Elizabeth Monbette Freeman. Anybody ever heard of her before? You've heard of her because you took my class? Yeah. Good. All right. So Monbette was a really, really important person, and I don't know why she doesn't get the shine that she deserves. So the American Revolution takes place. The American Revolution happens, and there is a fight for freedom. So the nation as we know it today wants to or seeks independence from Great Britain. And when they seek independence from Great Britain, they win. So now the United States as we know it today is its own independent nation. Unfortunately, slaves were still held in bondage. So everybody's celebrating being free. We have the 4th of July, but slaves are still held in captivity. And what happens is Monbette overhears powerful men talking about the Declaration of Independence over dinner. She hears them say, there's liberty, justice for all, pursuit of happiness, all men are created equally. And she says, well, why doesn't that apply to me? She sues for her freedom and she wins. When she wins, this creates a divide in our nation because Massachusetts becomes what's called a free state, and other people in the North follow suit, and they also become free states. Now, the South was very, very dependent upon slavery. They didn't really have any other way of making money, so they remained in the slavery institution. So moving forward a little bit, the cotton boom. What happens is slavery is on its way out. Not many people are wanting to participate in slavery anymore because it's not profitable. Tobacco loses a lot of value. Tobacco isn't really important, or it's not very valuable anymore. But this invention comes along, which is called the cotton gin. Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin, and now cotton is easier to clean. So you put cotton into here, and it cleans the cotton faster, meaning it takes the seeds out of the cotton. Now, there's also a big fashion boom that's happening in Europe. So there's a need for cotton. People need cotton so that they can make clothes. So this, accompanied with the boom in cotton, creates a new demand for slaves. So you have what is called the second Middle Passage. How many of you all have walked home before? Anybody here ever walked home before? All right, what's the furthest you've ever walked?
It wasn't that far.
Not that far, like a mile maybe?
Yeah.
A mile, 2 miles? All right. What about you?
2 miles.
Like 2 miles? All right. Would you walk from here to Murfreesboro? Why not? It's too far, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is just not even, you can't even imagine the stuff that, we're talking about. Like being held captive and not being able to use the bathroom, walking from the upper South to the lower South. But that's what these people had to do. So in the upper South, tobacco was dying out. So people went to the upper South to buy slaves to bring back down to the lower South. And they had to walk all the way back. They weren't going to give these people horses or anything like that. And some of them were transported through caravan. It just depended on what the person that was buying the slaves had. So with the second Middle Passage, these people go from the upper South to the lower South. So imagine walking from Tennessee or Nashville rather, to New Orleans, Louisiana. It's a long walk, right? So this picture here, what do you think happened to this gentleman? Why was he beaten?
Took too long
Took too long to do what?
to get back with stuff and bring back to the site.
Okay, that's a good guess. This could happen for a number of reasons. You could be beaten because you don't pick enough cotton. You could be beaten because you refuse some type of order that the master gave you. Anybody here ever been to a basketball game before? Mm-hmm. You all see how high the rim is? The rim is 10 feet, right? Now imagine a 10-foot bag. So like imagine just your backpack. Like imagine filling your backpack up with cotton. That would take a pretty long time. But imagine a 10-foot bag as long as the height to the rim. Imagine having to fill that up in a day's time. That's what slaves were asked to do. And if they didn't do that, in some cases, they didn't pick enough cotton, they were beaten until they got it right. So again, like I said, I know some of you are thinking, hey, it wouldn't have been me. I would have been ready to throw down. Some people were willing to respond to slavery or resist slavery through force. One of those people being Nat Turner. Anybody ever heard of Nat Turner before?
Yeah.
Y'all seen the movie?
Mm-hmm.
Just heard about him? Okay. So Nat Turner was a very intelligent man. I don't want anybody to think that he was just some, idiot that, had no kind of plan. Because everything that he did was actually really well planned out. So he organized a group of people together to revolt against their slave masters. He was also a reverend. So he got visions in his dreams that said that, these people who are performing slavery, they have to have their judgment day. And he said, I'm going to take this into my own hands. And what he did was he organized a group of about 75 people to rise up against their slave masters. So they get guns, they get knives, they just go knocking on door to door to door and just start slicing people up. All right? And you ask the question of why. Why would someone be so enraged to do something like that? Because he killed children, he killed wives, he killed mothers, He killed, slave owners who were males, whatever. Why would somebody be so enraged to do that? Nat Turner was actually treated really, really well as a slave originally, and then he was sold to another master because his master died off. When his master died off, he was treated horrible. He was treated just like anybody else. He saw rape. He saw, people being mistreated, and it was just too much for him. And he was enraged, and he organized this together in order to come up with the slave revolt. Again, I told you, this was very well planned out. He hid for 6 weeks before he was found. Once he was found, him and 16 other people were tried, and he was hung to make an example that you should never, ever do anything like this. Now, Nat Turner, they really wanted to make an example out of him. So hangings were a public event. So like how people promote a party, that's how people promoted hangings. And people took souvenirs from these hangings. So if somebody was hung, you might cut their finger off and take that souvenir and say, hey, I was at the hanging of this particular person. Now, Nat Turner's was really, really big. They did a lot of horrible things to make an example out of him. So, abolitionist movement, almost done. Well, I'm almost done. Abolitionist movement. So, don't want to get too religious on you, but the abolitionist movement was somewhat birthed out of a lot of religious beliefs. And one of those religious beliefs was the story of Exodus. So the story of Exodus, if you don't know, is where Moses freed the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. And people who were abolitionists, or people who believed in the abolishing of slavery, they took hold to this story. And what they did was they felt really guilty for slavery. And then they start the abolitionist movement. People like Frederick Douglass, a bunch of other people, obviously Harriet Tubman, one of the conductors on the Underground Railroad, were part of the abolitionist movement. And in the abolitionist movement, what they did was they set up little small spots for people to escape from the South to the North. So finally, how do we solve problems? The North and the South are consistently at odds. We solve them through war. The Civil War is really important because it was one of the first opportunities that slaves had to fight in wars as soldiers. Now, the only thing that is a little bit misleading about this particular photo is a lot of times slaves were not giving arms. They weren't giving guns to fight in the wars. So they were literally out there fighting with just their bare hands, or they were fighting, just trying to make things work. So what happens is the North and the South states, they fight against each other. The North wins, and then slavery is abolished. But is it really abolished? So in the next exhibit, which is called Slavery by Another Name, you'll learn a little bit more about what happens after slavery. Because typically what we do is we just jump from slavery to civil rights. But there's a long period of time that happens in between those two times.
Through the mass incarceration of black people, they were able to imprison a whole bunch of black people and put them in jail and then work them like they were slaves through the amendments. So the 13th Amendment was important because it created an amendment that abolished slavery. But it kind of had a loophole in it. If they were imprisoned, they were able to be treated as like slaves. That's why they had the mass incarceration, so that they could work as slaves. Slavery was so bad to people that they weren't able to take it. For example, the tragedy of Margaret Garner. Garner basically killed 3 of her children because she didn't want them exposed to slavery. She drowned one of them, and then I believe she slit the throat of the other 2. And honestly, 5 years after that, slavery was abolished, so she probably could have waited, but that's how deep it was, so she didn't want them to be exposed to that type of slavery. And then we got to Juneteenth, where that was when slavery was abolished in Texas. So that's why every day we celebrate Juneteenth like it's a celebration, like it's a graduation or something like that. And that is basically slavery by another name. And Then from there, we transitioned to the Jim Crow laws, which is slavery, and not slavery, segregation, which basically separated black folks and white folks through all aspects of life. They can eat the same place, they can drink from the same water fountains, etc., etc. Then we transitioned to the Board of Education, where we were fighting for the same education so that we could go to the same schools, so people like you and you could all go to the same school and not have a problem with the same education. Even though that wasn't good to some people, like for example, the story in Till, some people didn't like the idea of equality and still thought of black people as in a negative light. That's why a white lady said that Emmett Till whistled at her, and then two people ran into his house, dragged him out, abused him, mutilated him, and made his face look like this picture right here. He was unrecognizable to his parents and anybody that knew him. And through all of this gave rise to Black Power. Black Power just overall, just the fighting for freedom and equality for black people through the Black Panther Party, through boycotts, through sit-ins in restaurants, and it takes courage for the weak and various other things. Now, to the final exhibit. This is basically the continuing struggle that we have now today. Well, in more recent times. Like, seeing is believing. Like, the first few black TV shows where we have families going to college, looking beautiful, like the Bill Cosby Show, The Fresh Prince, and other shows of that nature. But on the more negative side, the riots that we had in LA and over Rodney King, who was beat at a traffic stop by the police, which is also connected to the Black Lives Matter movement, where, you know, young black men, older black men are just getting killed for basically no reason by the police. And another picture of this, which is Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. They had two different sides of the story. They had, basically, Malcolm X was like, I say more abrasive and more separate with his beliefs. He wanted black people to be equal to white folks, but he also wanted them to be separate. And Martin Luther King wanted them to be more united and together in freedom with the white folks and everything, which could be attributed to their different beliefs and religions, which could also lead to the different Black Lives Matter movements. Some movements are more abrasive and more separate, other movements are more peaceful. And this is all kind of talked about in hip-hop. Hip-hop is an intellectual movement in music. Being hip is to be, you know, in the transmitting what's going on. Hop is the actual action. And through music today, through Kendrick Lamar and other artists, they are talking about the problems in America, what's going on growing up in America, and how to educate and inform and then take action to the problems in America. This is why it's a continuing struggle, because we deal with these certain problems through the days.